Peter Lilley.
Deputy Speaker, I want to make two main points. The first is that actually the government's position is much clearer than many on the other side are willing to believe, and narrows very considerably the range of outcomes. And the second is that what matters as much, if not more, than the government's position is the position of our partners in Europe. Yet no one has mentioned that on the other side, with a sort of arrogance as if we can just say, we want this and we'll get it, or perhaps it's subservience that we say, we want this and we'll give any concession in order to obtain it. Now, the government's position has ruled out three options. We will not be part of the internal market of the European Union. I use the phrase internal market because that's what it says in European law. There's no such thing in European law as the single market. To be a member of the internal market, you have to be a member state, subject to all the laws of the European Union. And the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State today said we will not be subject to the European Court of Justice. We will not be members of the European Economic Area, because all members of the European Economic Area have to accept free movement, and the government has ruled out accepting a free movement. On top of which, you cannot negotiate service deals because you don't have control over your law about all your service industries. It was described during the campaign by the current Chancellor of the Exchequer as the worst of all possible worlds, and many others on that side supported it, though now they suddenly want to be part of the worst of all possible worlds. And thirdly, we cannot be subject to the common external tariff of the EU, because we're champions of free trade, according to the Prime Minister. We've set up a Department for International Trade which has to be able to negotiate tariffs, and we want to cut the tariffs on those products which we don't produce, where very high tariffs are imposed by the EU on clothing and food, which are damaging to the just about managing people in this country. So those three options are ruled out. That leaves two realistic options. I will, of course.
Helpful to him, but can I just say to my honourable friend, one good example of that is very, very recently, over just orange importation, the Customs Union has slapped an increase in tariff from 3% to 16%, solely to protect some producers in Spain, but of course raising costs of buying those products here in the United Kingdom. So food is now more expensive directly as a result of interventions in the Customs Union, which they want to be a part of.
Right honourable friend makes a very good point, and I think I would add, we do not manufacture oranges on easy scale in this country. So it leaves two realistic options. The first is that we continue with roughly the status quo, with tariff-free trade and no new barriers to service trade. And the EU already has free trade agreements with 50 countries which do not require free movement, so that is a possibility. And the second is that we trade with them on WTO terms, and perhaps they try and make trade in our services and financial service industries a bit more difficult. Now, the important thing is both those options are actually very simple to negotiate. Going from zero tariffs to zero tariffs is much easier than negotiating a trade agreement as between Canada and the European Union, where each side had 5,000 or 10,000 different tariff lines and had to trade them off against each other. We also have exactly the same rules on products and so on as our partners in Europe. So the status quo would be simple to negotiate. The WTO option doesn't even require negotiation. It's what happens if there is no successful outcome to negotiate. So both are very simple and could be done quickly. Now, also, I believe, both are acceptable to the UK. If we, obviously, retaining the status quo would, in most people's view, if we can get it immediately, be the superior option. But if we went to trading on WTO terms, the average tariff would be about 4%, much less than that on manufactured products in average, but 4% including the agricultural products. And we've just experienced a 15% devaluation against the euro. So our exporters will, on balance, be much better off, even with those tariffs, whereas their exporters to us will have to face a 15% hurdle plus that average 4% tariff, so they'll be much worse off than us. And it's very important that we emphasize to our negotiating partners that though we might prefer to continue with the status quo, if they don't want it, we are willing to walk away and trade on WTO terms. Quite a lot of members on the other side have been trades unionists. They're used to negotiating, but not many people in this House are used to negotiating. I can tell you cannot successfully negotiate unless you are prepared to walk away with no deal.
Right. Hear, hear.
But ultimately, it will be our partners in Europe, the EU27, who will make that choice as to whether we continue with roughly the status quo or whether we move to WTO and some obstacles. I'm sorry, I won't. They will choose. And if, obviously, their primary concern is the economic well-being of their people, they'll choose continuing free trade. If, however, their primary concern overriding that is political, and they want to punish us, and be seen to punish us, they'll go to WTO terms. In practice, they will punish themselves far more, and we should make that clear to them. We cannot negotiate our way into making them choose one option rather than the other. We can perhaps try and persuade them, and above all, we can persuade their industries and their electorates that they will be much better off if they continue trading with us on roughly the present basis than if they move to WTO terms, when they will be the principal losers, because we are their biggest single market. A fifth of all German cars come here, much of French wine comes here, etc., etc. Let's go to them and say, as a simple choice, make that...
Order.